In the quiet, suburban town of Brooksville, life moved along like a gentle stream, slow and predictable, barely disturbed by ripples. But in the days leading up to an unexpected night in December, the town would face a chilling nightmare that began with a single call to the local police precinct. This was no ordinary call, it was a call that every officer fears. The kind that blurs the lines between duty and family, reality and nightmare. It was the call that would change their lives forever. The story you are about to hear is one of tragedy, horror, and the unbreakable bonds of family, of parents who serve and protect, and the haunting discovery that would test them in unimaginable ways. Before we dive into this unsettling tale, let me take you back to where it all began. The chilling December air cut sharply through the night, and the streets were draped in silence. Detective Mark Evans was finishing his late-night paperwork in the dimly lit precinct when his phone buzzed. The voice on the other end was steady but tinged with an unmistakable urgency, a traffic stop involving a suspect's car on the outskirts of town, one reportedly holding young hostages. He immediately felt a weight settle in his chest. But there was nothing unusual yet, nothing alarming. He'd been in law enforcement long enough to expect the unexpected. Mark gathered his gear and walked out into the cold, unaware of the darkness he was stepping into. The kind of darkness that leaves an indelible mark on a person's soul. As he approached the location, a secluded stretch of road lined by barren trees that loomed over like watchful sentries, Mark noticed the suspect's car. It was a beat-up, dark sedan, the kind that wouldn't stand out in a crowd but now held the town's full attention. Several officers surrounded the vehicle, their breaths visible in the cold air, creating a tense, almost surreal scene. The suspect, a tall, wiry man with hollow eyes and an unsettling calm, sat in the driver's seat. The police radio crackled with updates as Mark joined his partner, Detective Sarah Monroe, a seasoned officer with nerves of steel. Yet even she seemed on edge tonight. As they carefully approached the car, a thin, muffled sound caught Mark's ear, a soft, distressed murmur coming from the back seat. He and Sarah exchanged a look, a wordless agreement that this was more than just another stop. Mark's pulse quickened, but he maintained his composure, edging closer to the car to see what, or rather who, was inside. And that's when he saw her, a young girl, no more than 16, her eyes covered by a strip of cloth, her hands trembling as they lay bound at her sides. The girl's name, they would later learn, was Lily Thompson, a blind teenager from a nearby town who had gone missing 3 days ago. But it wasn't just Lily in the car. Mark's gaze fell upon a second figure in the back, a figure he recognized with gut-wrenching clarity. It was his own son, Tyler, his eyes wide with terror as he sat beside the girl. The boy's face was bruised, and a mix of fear and confusion clouded his expression. In that moment, Mark felt a horror that no training could prepare him for, a horror that pierced straight through the armor of his profession and into his heart as a father. As his knees nearly buckled, he struggled to keep his voice steady, to keep his focus on the job at hand. But this was no ordinary call. This was his child, caught in the grip of something he couldn't yet understand. The man in the driver's seat, known only as Raymond Stark, was a drifter with a history of petty crimes and a documented history of psychotic breaks. Yet he had a calm demeanor that was almost chilling, a sense of control that felt deeply wrong. As Mark and Sarah tried to question him, he maintained an eerie silence, occasionally glancing back at the 2 teenagers in the rear seat, a faint, unsettling smile flickering at the corners of his mouth. Raymond's record was riddled with disturbing incidents: burglary, assault, and, most recently, accusations of stalking. But the files also hinted at something darker, something he'd managed to keep just beneath the surface. Whispers about missing persons and unsolved disappearances followed him like a shadow, and now, Mark feared his son and Lily had become part of a nightmare far worse than they could have anticipated. The investigation quickly revealed a web of connections that began to unravel the truth about Raymond Stark's twisted mind. In a series of flashbacks and police interviews, Mark and Sarah discovered that Raymond had grown up in a broken home, his childhood scarred by abuse and neglect. As he aged, his psyche fractured, and he became obsessed with control, especially over those he saw as innocent and vulnerable. To him, their fear was a form of power, a way to fill the void that had grown within him over the years. Mark's worst fears began to materialize as they found that Raymond had been watching Lily for weeks. He had seen her vulnerability, her blindness, as an opportunity. She represented innocence, something he had lost long ago, and now he sought to corrupt it, to exert the control he had been denied throughout his life. As the investigation continued, Lily's recounting of the last few days sent chills down their spines. Though blind, her memory was sharp, her senses heightened. She spoke of being taken in the dead of night, unable to fight back, unable to even see the face of her captor. She could only hear his voice, calm, measured, almost soothing, but dripping with malice. The sound of his footsteps as he paced around her, the cold touch of his hands as he moved her from one location to another, all of it painted a picture more terrifying than any scene Mark could imagine. Tyler, who had tried to help her, had been dragged into this nightmare, and Mark knew he had only minutes left to act before this horrific story reached an irreversible climax. As Mark and his team closed in on Raymond's background and previous hideouts, they pieced together a location, an abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of town. It was a place marked by decay and neglect, a fitting mirror of Raymond's inner turmoil. With his heart racing, Mark knew they were about to confront the darkest corners of a fractured mind, a place where innocence was taken, and horror lived in every shadow. They arrived at the farmhouse, and the air felt thick with a sense of dread. The dim light from the moon cast long, eerie shadows across the property as they approached. The team moved in silence, each step echoing the pounding of Mark's heart as he prepared himself to face the nightmare that had engulfed his family. Inside, the walls were lined with remnants of past horrors, newspaper clippings of missing children, eerie drawings, and broken furniture scattered about. And there, in the corner, stood Raymond, with Lily and Tyler by his side, bound but alive. Mark knew he had to tread carefully, the lives of those he loved depended on it. As the standoff began, Raymond's voice broke the silence. "They're mine now," he whispered, his voice laced with a chilling calm. "They're part of me, just like I was once part of them." Mark's hand tightened on his weapon, but his voice softened, trying to reach any remnants of humanity left in Raymond. "Raymond, this isn't you. This doesn't have to end like this. Let them go." But in Raymond's eyes, there was no light, no trace of the person he might have once been. Only the hollow stare of a man consumed by his own darkness. With every word Mark spoke, Raymond's smile only grew more unsettling, his head tilting ever so slightly as he watched the desperation on Mark's face. The tension in the room was thick, pressing down like an invisible weight. Tyler and Lily sat motionless, frozen in terror, unable to process the twisted nightmare they'd been forced into. Mark could feel his pulse in his ears, a relentless drumbeat urging him to act. He glanced at Sarah, who stood poised and ready, her eyes flicking between Raymond and the two teenagers. The entire team was on edge, their fingers twitching near their holsters, waiting for the slightest provocation. Raymond, sensing the rising tension, took a step back, dragging Lily and Tyler closer to him, his grip iron tight. He let out a hollow laugh, a sound so devoid of warmth it sent a shiver down Mark's spine. "Do you know what it's like, detective?" Raymond's voice was almost a whisper, but it carried a weight of pain and resentment. "To have everything taken from you, to feel invisible, to live in shadows?" His eyes glinted with a strange, disturbing excitement. "They don't understand me, but they will. They'll see the world like I do." Mark's voice was steady, but he could feel the edges of panic creeping in. "Raymond, they're just kids. Whatever pain you've been through, it doesn't have to end like this. You don't have to hurt them to be seen." But Raymond shook his head slowly, as though Mark's words were nothing more than a faint buzz. He seemed to drift into his own thoughts, his gaze distant, lost in memories and shadows. He muttered something under his breath, words that made no sense, fragments of conversations from a time long gone. The silence was broken by a soft sob from Lily, her blindfolded face tilted downward as tears traced silent paths down her cheeks. Tyler, though visibly terrified, tried to keep his composure, leaning close to her, murmuring reassurances that Mark couldn't hear. His son's bravery, even in the face of such horror, both filled Mark with pride and shattered him. Sarah shifted her stance slightly, drawing Raymond's attention. She spoke, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. "Raymond, if you let them go, we can help you. You don't have to carry this alone." But her words fell on deaf ears. Raymond's grip on the children tightened, his knuckles whitening as he pulled them closer. He laughed again, a hollow, empty sound that echoed through the dilapidated farmhouse. "Help me?" he scoffed. "There's no help for people like me. There never has been." In that moment, Mark realized that reason had no place here. Raymond had crossed a line from which he could never return, and Mark's priority shifted from negotiation to survival. His gaze locked onto Sarah's, a silent message passing between them. They had to act, and they had to act fast. Time seemed to slow as Sarah took a step forward, her voice dropping to a gentle murmur, distracting Raymond just long enough for Mark to make his move. In one swift motion, he lunged forward, grabbing hold of his son and yanking him out of Raymond's grasp. The scene erupted into chaos. Raymond snarled, his grip on Lily tightening as he struggled against the officers moving in to subdue him. But in the frenzied moment, he managed to drag Lily deeper into the shadows of the room, a flash of madness in his eyes. With one final burst of strength, he held her close, his face twisted into a mask of pure rage and sorrow. The officers closed in, but Raymond's gaze met Mark's, his lips curling into a final, chilling smile. "You think you've saved them," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the commotion. "But they'll carry this with them, forever." In one final, horrifying moment, Raymond took his last action, a decision that would haunt everyone present for years to come. The sound of gunfire echoed through the farmhouse, piercing the silence, a terrible punctuation to the nightmare that had unfolded. When the dust settled, Lily was safe, but the scene left a permanent scar on everyone involved. Mark held his son close, feeling the weight of the trauma that had seeped into their lives, a darkness that would linger long after Raymond was gone. In the weeks that followed, Brooksville tried to return to normal, but the events of that night lingered like a specter, casting a shadow over the town. Mark, though a seasoned detective, found himself changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. The sense of security he once took for granted was shattered, and a lingering sadness filled the void it left behind. Tyler, too, was never the same. Though he and Lily survived the ordeal, the memory of Raymond's twisted smile haunted his dreams. In the dark hours of the night, he could still hear Raymond's final words, the echo of a man consumed by his own darkness. As for Lily, her resilience became a beacon of hope in the aftermath. Though scarred, she refused to let the horror define her. Her bravery, her quiet strength, inspired those around her, a testament to the human spirit's power to endure, even in the face of unimaginable darkness. But for Mark, the scars ran deeper. He had faced many horrors in his line of work, but nothing had ever hit this close to home. As he looked at his son, now older and wiser in ways no child should be, he wondered if the wounds would ever truly heal. In the end, the events of that night became a whispered legend in Brooksville, a cautionary tale of tragedy, resilience, and the haunting truths that linger in the shadows of the human mind. The town would move on, as it always did, but for those who had lived through it, the memory of Raymond Stark would remain, a dark reminder of the thin line between light and shadow, between safety and terror.